Among the many species of the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta quadrants, some have evolved to share certain traits and characteristics, possibly due to a common ancestor who may have seeded life on a number of worlds during their interstellar travels. There are other species, however, which differ wildly from the two-legged humanoids which populate the galaxy, such as the wormhole aliens, also known as the Prophets of Bajor, the changelings of the Great Link, or species 8472 of fluidic space. And while the many varied and exotic species of the galaxy each have unique skills and abilities, perhaps the most powerful of them all were the immortal Q of the Q continuum. From the perspective of humans and other similar species, they had godlike powers, able to manipulate energy, matter, time, and space. Many of the Q believed they were the highest and purest form of life, and during one occasion, when a Q was transformed into a human, he claimed to have an IQ of 2005. However, there are some limitations to their powers, as they could be killed, though the death of a Q was a serious issue with lasting galaxy-wide repercussions. A Q, later known as Quinn, made it seem as though they evolved over eons to become these powerful beings. Yet another Q, who was known throughout the Federation, claimed that the Q have always existed. Whatever their origins, the new era, as they called it, saw them reach a golden age where they explored the universe and shared thoughts and opinions about every subject imaginable. And while some of them continued to influence galactic events wherever they deemed appropriate, most became lazy and apathetic, choosing to simply maintain the status quo without any changes that might disturb their society. Yet things at last started to change when a member of their species broke with normalcy and rebelled against the system, even growing fond of taking humanoid form and interacting personally with less advanced beings like the humans of the Alpha Quadrant. In the 24th century, as the Federation began to explore further into deep space, this rebel Q appeared to the crew of the USS Enterprise, accusing their species of straying too far from their home system, calling them a dangerous, savage child race, unprepared to deal with the dangers that awaited them. Captain Jean-Luc Picard disagreed with this assessment and defended humanity, claiming that they had made rapid progress and were no longer the violent and greedy people their history might suggest. Placing humanity on trial, it was decided that Picard and his crew would be tested, made to deal with the mystery of Farpoint Station, where a species possessed a type of technology that could build objects of great complexity, seemingly out of nowhere. When the station came under attack, Picard was presented with an opportunity to use violence to put an end to the problem, but instead used his mind to solve the puzzle, discovering that a sentient being with incredible powers was being held as a prisoner, and in response its mate was attacking the facility. By ensuring the release of the creature, the attack was stopped and the mystery solved. Having passed their test, Q allowed them to continue on their journey exploring the galaxy, but told them the trial was not over and he'd be watching their progress. The next time they met, Q informed them that humanity was proving to be an interesting species, and that they seemed to possess an insatiable curiosity, a desire to grow and explore that the Q could not comprehend. There was even a possibility that humanity might one day evolve to become similar to the Q, or even surpass them. As a result, Q chose Commander Riker, first officer aboard the Enterprise, to be given the incredible powers of his species in order to tempt him into joining the Q continuum. In this way, he would serve as a model of human behavior which could be studied to bring new ideas into their realm. However, Q proved too arrogant and confident in his ability to convince Riker, agreeing to stay away from the Enterprise should he fail. Ultimately, he was unable to convince the first officer, and so Q was forced to leave them. Many now grew impatient with the rebel Q, as his actions had proven so disruptive that for a time he became exiled from the continuum. Returning to the crew of the Enterprise, Q then tried to join them on their voyages, offering to help guide them through the many dangers and mysteries that awaited. However, Picard refused, and so Q transported their vessel 7,000 light years to see a cube-shaped ship from a relentless and merciless species known as the Borg traveling through space. The Enterprise only survived the encounter when Picard admitted to needing Q's help. As it so happened, the Borg would eventually travel through time, resulting in some of their drones crash landing in the Arctic ice of Earth centuries earlier. In 2153, several of these drones were accidentally activated by a group of scientists, allowing them to send a signal to Borg space, which would take 200 years to arrive. This message then pointed the way towards Earth, and may have been the catalyst that prompted the Borg to send the Q encountered by the Enterprise. This implies that when Q transported Picard and his ship to meet the Borg for the first time, he did it not only as a game for his own amusement, but as a warning to give humanity time to prepare for the approaching threat. The rest of the Q continuum grew increasingly upset with Q's actions, and so chose to strip him of his powers, forcing him to live the rest of his life as a mortal in punishment, and so he chose to take human form in order to join the Enterprise crew so they might protect him from his enemies. Although his integration into the crew was difficult, he came to care for them in his own way and even offered to sacrifice himself to save them from harm. The other Q, witnessing his selfless act, restored his powers and welcomed him back into the continuum. In the coming years, Q would return and interact with the Enterprise crew on a number of occasions, and while his meddling was often negatively received, he helped Picard a number of times, even acting as a spiritual guide in confronting his past and understanding the consequences of life choices he'd made. During one occasion, Q visited the Federation outpost of Deep Space Nine, and there mockingly challenged Benjamin Sisko to a fight. Yet to his surprise, Sisko did not have the same aversion to violence as Picard, and proceeded to punch him in the face. 7 years after commencing the trial of humanity, Q once again appeared before Picard, arranging for another test, this time involving a time travel mystery, which the captain eventually solved. Q then confessed that the Continuum wanted to see if humans were capable of understanding more advanced concepts about the nature of the universe. However, it was then made clear that while they passed the test, the Q would continue watching humanity, proclaiming that the trial never ends. Several years later, when the crew of the USS Voyager became stranded in the Delta Quadrant, they accidentally released a Q from his prison, prompting the former rebel, now reformed Q, to appear in order to recapture the criminal. However, the Q, who was later known as Quinn, requested asylum on Voyager, explaining that he wanted the freedom to commit suicide, which was being denied. Captain Janeway then decided to hold a hearing, and there Quinn argued that the Q have been alive for so long and experienced so much, the Continuum was now a place where nothing ever happened, and where their people were so apathetic they no longer even spoke to each other. Quinn, who had formerly been one of their great philosophers, saw that the severe stagnation in their society was a problem, and became inspired by the antics of the rebel Q, who challenged authority and created chaos. He then pointed out the irony that the renegade was now just like all the others, and was even trying to stop another free thinker from rebelling as he had. Throughout the hearing, they learned Quinn was actually an important figure in galactic history, having influenced a number of important events of the past, including helping Isaac Newton discover his theories, saving the life of William Riker's ancestor, and was even involved in starting the 100-Year War between the Romulans and Vulcans. It was argued that such an important being could not simply be allowed to end his life, and that the repercussions of allowing it might be drastic for the Continuum. However, Janeway ultimately sided with Quinn and the rights of the individual, forcing Q to make him mortal. And while Janeway tried to convince Quinn to find happiness living out his mortal life, the former Q killed himself soon after. Although Q had argued against this action, he could not help but admire Quinn's conviction and became inspired to return to his rebellious ways. And so when word of Quinn's death reached the Continuum, a great civil war erupted, with Q leading a faction of rebels that wanted to change society against the establishment that wanted to keep things as they were. The war grew vicious, and many of their people died, resulting in a number of supernovas erupting throughout the galaxy. However, with the help of the Voyager crew, who became involved in the war, a peace was at last reached when it was decided that the rebel Q would mate with a female Q and produce the first child ever born to the Continuum. Yet Q Jr., as he became known, was not quite the savior they had hoped for, instead growing up to be wild, arrogant, and selfish. When Q arranged for Janeway to take the boy and teach him human values, his behavior improved, and these changes, along with the importance of his father, convinced the others to allow the boy back into the Continuum. Love Star Trek? Then why not check out Loot Crate and their special Mission Crate, with exclusive Star Trek collectibles, apparel, and gear delivered right to your door every month. If interested, be sure to click on the link in the description box below. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Warden of the X, Sir Dayron of House Ashford, Barachado, and Glegnis, son of Vorin. If you would like to help CivilizationEx, click on the Patreon link, and please be sure to like and subscribe, and click on the links to see more.